Liam Miller was an invisible man. He moved through the glittering, indifferent city like a ghost, a smudge of gray against a canvas of relentless color and wealth. His world was a small one, confined to the four peeling walls of its tiny room, the clatter of the service elevator at his cleaning job, and the hushed, sterile quiet of the hospital ward where his grandmother slept. His life was a collection of worn things, worn shoes with soles thin as paper, worn shirts with collars frayed from 1,000 washings, a worn hope that felt heavier each morning. He was 24 years old, but his eyes held the ancient weariness of a man who had fought too many losing battles. Yet, within that exhaustion, a quiet fire still burned. It was the stubborn, resilient flame of duty. His grandmother, Elena, was the anchor of his world. She was the one who had raised him. Her hands, now frail and still, once weaving stories and warmth into the fabric of his childhood. Her laughter, a sound he now only heard in his dreams, had been the soundtrack to his happiest memories. Now, that soundtrack was replaced by the rhythmic, mournful beep of a heart monitor. The doctors used calm, professional words: coronary angioplasty, a critical blockage. They spoke of procedures and costs in the same detached tone, numbers that might as well have been astronomical figures from a textbook. To them, it was a medical problem with a financial solution. To Liam, it was a death sentence wrapped in an invoice, $50,000. The number was an obscenity. It was a mountain he could never hope to climb, an ocean he could never swim. It was more money than he had ever seen, more than he could ever earn in a decade of scrubbing the floors of people who spent that much on a watch. He worked 2 jobs. By day, he delivered groceries, his legs aching as he climbed endless flights of stairs in buildings without elevators. By night, he cleaned the cavernous empty offices of a downtown law firm, the silence of the polished marble floors amplifying the frantic ticking of the clock in its head. Every dollar he saved was a drop in a vast, mocking desert. It was never enough. It would never be enough. This morning, the desperation had a sharper edge. The doctor had called. Elena's condition was deteriorating. They needed to operate soon, or there would be nothing left to operate on. The weak, gray light of dawn seeped through his single window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Liam sat at his small, wobbly table, a cup of bitter, instant coffee untouched before him. The silence in the room was absolute, a heavy blanket smothering his thoughts. His gaze fell upon a small wooden box on his dresser. It was the only thing his grandfather had left him. A man he knew only through a single faded photograph and his grandmother's wistful stories. He had been a good man, she always said, a kind man with big dreams. He had died when Liam was just a baby, his dreams turning to dust along with him. Liam had never opened the box. It felt like a sacred space, a final connection to a ghost. But now, all sacred things felt like luxuries he could not afford. With trembling fingers, he picked it up. It was light, made of simple, unvarnished pine. He lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of yellowed cotton, was a single folded piece of paper. It was thick and brittle with age. Beside it lay a heavy, ornate, old-fashioned key, its brass head tarnished with a deep green patina. He unfolded the paper. It was a letter written in a looping, elegant script that seemed to belong to another century. "My dearest Liam," it began, "if you are reading this, then the world has not been as kind to you as I had prayed it would be. I am sorry for that. I am sorry I was not there to protect you. Know that my greatest failure was not in business, but in leaving your grandmother and you to face the wolves alone." Liam's breath caught in his throat. The words felt like a hand reaching across time, a ghostly touch on his shoulder. "I cannot undo my mistakes," the letter continued, "but I did my best to leave behind a shield for you. It is not the legacy I wanted, built of love and shared success, but one of cold, hard numbers, a necessary evil. The world understands numbers. Go to the Sterling Legacy Bank on Grand Avenue, the main branch. Ask for Mr. Thomas. Show him the key. Do not show it to anyone else. He was my most trusted friend, a man of unimpeachable integrity. He will know what to do. The paper you hold is not just a letter. It is a key of another kind, a testament. What you find might shock you. It might anger you, but it is yours. It has always been yours. Use it to build a life of peace for yourself and your grandmother. Use it to be the man I was not strong enough to be. Your grandfather, Arthur Miller. Liam read the letter 3 times. His mind, numb with worry, struggled to process the words. Sterling Legacy Bank, Mr. Thomas. A key. A testament. It sounded like something from a novel, a desperate fantasy his own mind might have concocted. But the paper was real. The key was heavy and cold in his palm. Could it be? A flicker of impossible hope ignited in the cold darkness of his despair. It was a foolish, childish hope, the kind that gets a man's heart broken. But it was all he had left. He looked at the picture of his grandmother on the wall, her smile bright and full of life. He had to try, for her. He put on his best clothes, a pair of dark trousers that were slightly too short, and a white shirt he had painstakingly ironed the night before. He looked at his reflection in the cracked mirror, a humble boy in a world that had no time for humility. He looked like a lamb heading to the slaughter. He pocketed the letter and the key, their weight a strange mix of burden and promise against his leg. He walked out of his small room, closing the door on his world of gray, and stepped into the overwhelming torrent of the city. Sterling Legacy Bank was not a building. It was a monument, a cathedral of commerce. It towered over Grand Avenue, a gleaming spear of glass and steel that seemed to pierce the very sky. Its entrance was a gaping maw of polished granite, flanked by bronze doors so large they looked as if they guarded the gates of a mythical kingdom. Liam stopped across the street, his heart hammering against his ribs. The people flowing in and out of those doors were a different species. They wore suits that cost more than his rent for a year. Their shoes shone with an impossible luster, and they walked with an effortless confidence that was as foreign to Liam as a forgotten language. They belonged here. He was a stain on a white dress. He felt the familiar crushing weight of his own insignificance. Every instinct screamed at him to turn back, to return to the familiar shadows where he belonged. Who was he to walk into such a place? Who was he to ask for a man named Thomas and present an old rusty key? They would laugh at him. They would call security. He closed his eyes and saw his grandmother's face, pale and still against the white hospital pillow. The image was a spur driving him forward. He took a deep, shuddering breath and crossed the street. The air inside the bank was different. It was cool, still, and smelled of money, an expensive silence scented with leather and old paper. The lobby was a vast, echoing ocean of luxury. The floor was a checkerboard of black and white marble that stretched toward a ceiling so high it seemed to hold its own weather system. Sunlight streamed through colossal arched windows, illuminating the swirling dust like scattered diamonds. A silent army of tellers stood behind a long, formidable counter of dark wood, their faces impassive masks. Customers spoke in hushed, reverent tones, as if in a library or a church. Every surface gleamed, every sound was muffled. It was a place designed to intimidate, to remind every person who entered of their precise place in the food chain. Liam felt his own place with painful clarity. He was at the very bottom. He clutched the strap of his worn messenger bag, his knuckles white. He felt the stares of the security guards, their eyes sweeping over him, cataloging his cheap clothes, his nervous posture. He felt like a strayed dog that had wandered into a palace. He approached the main information desk, a circular island of marble in the center of the lobby. The woman behind it had hair sculpted into a perfect, immovable helmet and a smile that did not reach her cold, assessing eyes. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice crisp and dismissive. I'm here to see a Mr. Thomas," Liam stammered, his own voice sounding thin and weak in the cavernous space. The woman's smile tightened. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, I was told to come here by my grandfather." He saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Amusement, perhaps, or pity. "And what is your grandfather's name?" "Arthur Miller." The name meant nothing to her. She typed it into her computer, her long red nails clicking on the keyboard. After a moment, she shook her head. "There's no one by that name with an appointment, and we have no employee named Tomas. Perhaps you have the wrong bank." It was a clear dismissal. Liam's heart sank. It was a fool's errand, a cruel joke played by a dead man. He was about to turn away, to retreat back into his world of shadows, when a voice boomed across the lobby, shattering the reverent silence. "What is this peasant doing in my line of sight? Get him out of here!" The voice was a whip-crack of arrogance. Liam turned to see a man striding through the bronze doors, as if he owned them. He was tall and impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit, a shock of silver at his temples giving him a distinguished, predatory look. He was followed by a small entourage of younger men in similar suits, all laughing at something he had said. This was Marcus Thorne. Even Liam, in his small world, knew that name. Thorne was a real estate titan, a piranha in the shark tank of the city's financial elite. His face was plastered on magazine covers and business journals. His cruel smile a symbol of ruthless success. He moved not like he owned the bank, but like he owned the very air everyone breathed. The bank manager, a portly man named Mr. Henderson, scurried out from a side office, his face a mask of panicked sycophancy. "Mr. Thorne, a pleasure, a pleasure. We weren't expecting you today. I came to see if my new acquisition was being polished correctly," Thorne boomed, gesturing vaguely at the entire building. "And what do I find? Riff-raff cluttering up the lobby. It lowers the tone." His cold, dismissive eyes landed on Liam. They swept over him from head to toe, a slow, deliberate appraisal that was more insulting than any slur. A smirk twisted Thorne's lips. "Look at this," he said to his followers, his voice dripping with theatrical contempt. "Did you wander in from a Dickens novel, boy? Are you here to beg for scraps?" The entourage snickered, a chorus of hyenas. Liam felt a hot flush of shame creep up his neck. He wanted the marble floor to swallow him whole. He stood frozen, unable to speak, his fists clenched at his sides. Thorne took a step closer, invading Liam's personal space. He smelled of expensive cologne and a sadistic power that was almost tangible. He noticed the corner of the old letter peeking out of Liam's pocket. With a flick of his fingers, he plucked it out. "What's this? A love letter? Or a list of your debts?" Thorne asked, unfolding the brittle paper. His eyes scanned the first few lines, and he let out a short, barking laugh. "Arthur Miller," he sneered, his voice echoing in the now silent lobby. Everyone was watching, the tellers, the customers, the guards. It was a public execution. My father used to talk about a Miller, a pathetic dreamer who couldn't cut it, ran away with his tail between his legs. Is that your legacy, boy? A heritage of failure? The words were like a physical blow, an insult to his grandfather, a man he never knew but was bound to by blood and this final desperate quest. Something inside Liam, something that had been bent and bruised for years, finally snapped. "Give that back," Liam said, his voice low but steady. Thorne raised an eyebrow, amused by the defiance. "Or what? You'll challenge me to a duel? What could you possibly have to fight with? Your profound sense of poverty?" He glanced at the letter again, his eyes catching the mention of the key. "A key. How quaint. Let me guess. It opens a box filled with dust and broken promises." Liam saw his chance slipping away. The humiliation was a suffocating fog. But then he remembered the instructions. Ask for Mr. Thomas. Show him the key. Ignoring Thorne, he turned back to the terrified bank manager, Mr. Henderson. "Please," Liam said, his voice gaining a sliver of strength. "The letter says to find Mr. Thomas. It says this key, it's for a vault. Vault 777. He had held back that detail, a final desperate card to play. At the mention of Vault 777, Henderson's face went white. A flicker of genuine fear crossed his features. Even Marcus Thorne paused, his smirk faltering for a fraction of a second. The name clearly meant something. Thorne recovered instantly, his arrogance flooding back in a tidal wave. He laughed, a loud booming sound that was full of genuine mirth. "Vault 777? Oh, this is richer than I could have imagined. Boy, do you have any idea what you're talking about?" He turned to the captivated audience. "Vault 777 is a legend in this bank. A ghost story. It's an archaic vault that hasn't been opened in 50 years. They say the man who commissioned it died without ever leaving the access protocols. It's a dead box, a time capsule of nothing." He looked back at Liam, his eyes glittering with a cruel, predatory light. He saw an opportunity for a truly spectacular humiliation. "All right, boy," Marcus Thorne declared, his voice ringing through the lobby. "You've piqued my interest. I'm a gambling man. I'll make you a deal." He paused for dramatic effect, ensuring every eye was on him. "Your grandmother? She's sick, isn't she?" he said, his voice dropping to a tone of mock sympathy. He must have overheard it, or perhaps he just guessed. People like Liam always had sick relatives. "Needs surgery, I imagine? Something expensive?" Liam flinched, as if struck. The casual, cruel way Thorne spoke of his grandmother's suffering was obscene. "I'll pay for it," Thorne announced. "The entire thing. 50,000, 100,000, I don't care. I'll pay your debt to the world, all of it." A collective gasp went through the lobby. "All you have to do," Thorne continued, a sadistic smile spreading across his face, "is open that vault. Right here, right now. Prove that your pathetic legacy isn't just a pile of dust." He leaned in closer, his voice a venomous whisper for Liam's ears alone. "But when you fail, And you will fail. You will get down on your knees in the center of this lobby. You will kiss my shoes and announce to everyone that you and your entire family line are nothing but fraudulent, insignificant worms. And then you will walk out of here and never show your face in a place like this again. It was a monster's bargain, a public vivisection of a man's soul, offered with the casual grace of ordering a coffee. The silence was deafening. Every person in the bank was frozen, watching the drama unfold. The bank manager, Henderson, looked like he was about to have a heart attack. He knew the vault couldn't be opened. No one had the codes. No one had the biometrics. The system was ancient, offline, a mechanical fortress. Liam's mind was a whirlwind of terror and rage. It was an impossible choice. His grandmother's life on one side, his own utter and complete humiliation on the other. But Thorne had made a critical mistake. He had insulted Arthur Miller. He had desecrated the memory of his grandfather and, in doing so, had poured fuel on the tiny, resilient flame inside Liam. The flame roared to life. The fear was still there, a cold knot in his stomach, but now it was joined by something else, a hard, unyielding resolve. The years of being invisible, of being pushed down and stepped on, coalesced into a single point of diamond-hard fury. He looked Marcus Thorne directly in the eye. The arrogance, the smug certainty, the sheer, unadulterated cruelty. Liam had seen that look before, in the eyes of landlords and bosses and city officials. It was the look of a world that saw him as less than human, and he was done with it. "You have a deal," Liam said. His voice did not tremble. It was clear, cold, and echoed with a finality that surprised even himself. The war had begun. A slow, cruel smile spread across Marcus Thorne's face. "Excellent," he purred. "Henderson, escort our little friend to the vault. Let's give him his stage." Mr. Henderson, looking pale and sweaty, nodded numbly. "This way, sir," he mumbled to Liam, his tone a mixture of pity and fear. He led Liam away from the main lobby, down a hushed corridor carpeted in thick blood-red wool. Thorne and his sycophantic entourage followed behind, their footsteps like the steady march of a firing squad. The rest of the lobby's occupants, drawn by the irresistible gravity of the spectacle, followed at a respectful distance. This was better than theater. It was a public execution of a man's hope. They arrived at a massive circular door of polished steel set into a wall of granite. It looked less like a vault door and more like an airlock on a starship. In the center was a complex-looking panel with a keyhole, a number pad, and a dark glass screen. This was Vault 777. It radiated an aura of immense, stubborn permanence. "Be my guest," Thorne said with a grand, mocking sweep of his arm. "The stage is yours. Dazzle us." His friends chuckled, already tasting the victory. Liam's heart was a frantic bird against the glass of his ribs. The sheer physical reality of the vault was overwhelming. The letter felt flimsy in his pocket now, the key a child's toy. What had his grandfather been thinking? Was this all just a madman's cruel prank from beyond the grave? He took a deep breath, pushing the doubt away. He had made his choice. He had to see it through. He remembered his grandfather's words, "Show him the key. The paper is a key of another kind." He looked at Henderson. "The letter says, 'I need Mr. Thomas.'" Henderson wrung his hands. "There is no Mr. Thomas, I told you." "He's lying," a quiet voice said from the back of the crowd. An elderly man stepped forward, parting the sea of curious onlookers. He was small and stooped with age, dressed in a simple, well-worn but clean janitor's uniform. His face was a roadmap of wrinkles, but his eyes were sharp and clear. "My name is Thomas," the old man said, his voice quiet, but carrying an undeniable authority. He looked at Liam with a gaze that was both sad and kind. "I have been waiting for you, son, for a very long time." Thorne stared at the old janitor in disbelief, then burst into laughter. "This is your man? A janitor? Oh, the poetry of it all! Your savior sweeps the floors!" Tomas ignored him completely. He walked to Liam and placed a gentle, reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Your grandfather was a great man, Liam, a visionary. He knew this day might come. He knew that true loyalty cannot be bought, it must be earned, and he knew that sometimes the most important people are the ones no one sees." He turned to the vault door. "Arthur designed this lock himself. He didn't trust the new digital ways. He believed in things you could touch, things with history." Tomas looked at Liam. "The key is only the first step." Liam's hand trembled as he pulled the old brass key from his pocket. The metal was cold against his skin. He stepped forward and inserted it into the keyhole. It slid in with a smooth, satisfying click. He turned it. A deep, resonant thud echoed from within the door's mechanism. A low hum started, and the dark glass screen flickered to life, displaying a single stark command. "Testament!" Thorne's laughter died in his throat. His smirk wavered. He had never seen the lock activate before. No one had. "It's just a password," Thorne muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "He'll never guess it." "It is not a password," Tomas said softly. "It is a request. The testament your grandfather wrote. The lock needs to see it." Liam understood, the paper in his pocket. It wasn't just a letter. He carefully removed the brittle document. His fingers tracing the elegant script, he held it up to the glass screen. A thin, red line of light scanned down the page like a modern copier analyzing an ancient text. The hum grew louder. The screen flashed. "Voice authentication required. State the founder's creed." Thorne scoffed. "A creed? What is this, a cult? He's finished. It's over." Liam's heart sank. "A creed?" The letter said nothing of a creed. He looked at Tomas, his eyes pleading. Tomas smiled gently. "Your grandfather embedded it in the letter, my boy. He knew only his blood would read it with the right heart to understand. Read the last line of the first paragraph again. Not just the words, but the meaning." Liam's eyes flew back to the paper. "My greatest failure was not in business, but in leaving your grandmother and you to face the wolves alone." Face the wolves alone. It wasn't just a turn of phrase, it was a code. But what was the creed? He thought back to his grandmother's stories. She always said Arthur was obsessed with integrity, that he believed wealth was a responsibility, not a prize. He used to say that a man's worth was measured by... The memory hit him like lightning. A phrase his grandmother had repeated 100 times, a saying she had attributed to his grandfather, a family motto he had never truly understood until this very second. He stepped up to the panel, the entire room holding its breath. Marcus Thorne watched, his face a mask of arrogant certainty, a cruel smile already forming, ready to celebrate his victory. Liam leaned in and spoke, his voice clear and resonant in the absolute silence. "True wealth is not what you keep, but what you give away." For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. The screen remained dark. Thorne's smile widened. The crowd let out a collective sigh of disappointment, and then a soft chime echoed through the corridor. The screen flashed green. "Identity verified. Welcome, Miller." A series of heavy, powerful clicks sounded from deep within the door. With a great, groaning hiss of displaced air, the massive steel circle began to retract into the wall. It moved with an impossible smoothness, revealing a dark, square opening. The laughter froze on Marcus Thorne's face. It did not just die. It was strangled, choked off mid-chuckle, leaving his mouth hanging open in a grotesque parody of mirth. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving behind a sickly, pale canvas of pure, unadulterated shock. His eyes, moments before glittering with sadistic glee, were now wide, glassy orbs of disbelief. The entire corridor was plunged into a silence so profound it felt like a physical weight. The hushed whispers, the nervous coughs, the smug snickers, all of it vanished, sucked into the vacuum created by that one impossible event. The only sound was the faint final hum of the vault mechanism powering down. Liam stood before the open vault, his own heart pounding a deafening rhythm in his ears. He, too, was in shock. It had worked. The mad, desperate gamble had actually worked. Inside the vault, there was no treasure chest, no pile of gold bars. There was only a simple wooden desk and a single leather-bound ledger sitting upon it. Next to the ledger was a stack of what looked like stock certificates and a thick manila envelope sealed with wax. The audience, which had been expecting failure, was paralyzed. Their scorn had turned to stunned disbelief, a jarring transition that left them gawking like fish. Then, slowly, a new emotion began to ripple through the crowd. Awe. Mr. Henderson, the bank manager, stared at the open vault as if he were seeing a miracle. His jaw worked silently, and his face was a mixture of terror and dawning respect. He looked from the vault to Liam, and then to the old janitor, Thomas, as if seeing them for the first time. Thomas simply smiled, a quiet, knowing expression on his face. He placed a gentle hand on Liam's back, a silent gesture of congratulations. It was Thorne's reaction that was the most dramatic. He was a statue carved from rage and astonishment. His entourage of sycophants, who had been preening and smirking just moments before, now stood frozen, their weak smiles evaporating from their faces. They looked at their boss, then at Liam, their small, cruel minds unable to process the sudden, violent shift in the power dynamic. Liam took a tentative step into the vault. The air inside was cool and smelled of old paper and leather. It felt like stepping into a time capsule. He reached out and touched the ledger, his fingers tracing the gold-leaf title on its spine. Sterling and Miller Holdings, Founding Charter. Sterling, as in Sterling Legacy Bank, and Miller, as in Arthur Miller, as in him. He opened the ledger. The first page was a mission statement, written in his grandfather's elegant script, detailing a company founded on principles of ethical investment and community support. The second page listed the founding partners. Arthur Miller, 51% controlling interest. Jonathan Thorne, 49% interest. Jonathan Thorne, Marcus Thorne's father. Liam felt a wave of dizziness. He flipped through the pages. They were filled with meticulous records, deeds, and ownership certificates. His grandfather had not just been a depositor. He had not just been a customer. He had been the owner, the majority owner. Liam picked up the stack of stock certificates. They were for dozens of companies, blue-chip corporations real estate holdings, and a massive controlling block of shares in Thorne Industries, Marcus Thorne's own flagship company. The final piece was the sealed manila envelope. With trembling hands, he broke the wax seal. Inside was a single heavy document. It was the deed. The deed to the very building they were standing in. The land, the structure, everything. It was all in the name of Arthur Miller. He stepped back out of the vault, holding the ledger and the deed. The silence in the corridor was still absolute. He held up the ledger, its title facing the crowd. "Sterling and Miller," he said, his voice now strong and clear, resonating with an authority he had never known he possessed. A low gasp rippled through the onlookers. A few of the older bank employees, people who had been there for decades, exchanged looks of sudden, shocking comprehension. The old myth, the ghost story of a forgotten founding partner, was true. Mr. Henderson finally found his voice. He stumbled forward, his professional mask shattered, replaced by raw, frantic awe. He took the ledger from Liam's hands as if it were a holy relic. His eyes, wide and panicked, scanned the first few pages. It's legitimate," he whispered, his voice cracking. "The signature, the corporate seal, it's all here. It's the original charter." He looked up at Liam, his face pale, his eyes filled with a terrifying new respect. He was no longer looking at a poor boy in cheap clothes. He was looking at the man who owned the bank. "Mr. Miller," Henderson stammered, the name feeling alien and powerful on his tongue. "My God, Mr. Miller!" The dam of silence finally broke. The crowd erupted into a cacophony of excited, disbelieving murmurs. The story was rewriting itself in real time, right before their eyes. The beggar was a prince. The invisible man was the king. But all eyes eventually turned to Marcus Thorne. He stood paralyzed, his face a storm of conflicting emotions. The shock had given way to a dark, purple rage. A vein throbbed in his temple. His fists were clenched so tightly his knuckles were white. "Lies!" he finally roared, his voice raw and ragged. "It's a trick, a forgery. My father built this empire. He built everything." "Your father was a partner, Marcus," Tomas said, his quiet voice cutting through Thorne's fury like a razor. "A junior partner. Arthur was the genius. He was the heart. Your father was the ambition. When Arthur had to step away to care for his sick wife, Liam's grandmother, your father saw his chance. He seized control, consolidated the assets, and wrote Arthur out of history. He told everyone Arthur had failed and run away, a convenient lie to cover a monstrous theft." The pieces clicked into place in Liam's mind with sickening clarity. The betrayal, the poverty, his grandmother's long, slow decline brought on by stress and hardship. It wasn't just misfortune. It was a crime. A crime committed by Marcus Thorne's father, the fruits of which Marcus had been enjoying his entire arrogant life. The debt he had been struggling to pay was not his. It was theirs. A moral debt, 50 years overdue. "You're a liar, old man!" Thorne screamed, his composure completely gone. He lunged towards Thomas, his face contorted in a mask of pure hatred. Two security guards, who moments ago had been looking at Liam with contempt, now moved instantly to block Thorne's path. Their allegiance had shifted with the gravitational pull of true power. Thorne stopped, breathing heavily, his expensive suit suddenly looking like a costume on a cornered animal. He looked around at the faces in the crowd. The mockery was gone. The sycophantic smiles were gone. In their place was a mixture of pity, fascination, and a cold, dawning contempt. The very look he had given Liam. He was no longer the ringmaster. He was the clown. His eyes finally met Liam's. In them, Liam saw not just hatred, but something else. A flicker of fear, a dawning, unwilling respect that was more painful to Thorne than any financial loss. He had been beaten, not by a rival billionaire, not by a corporate raider, but by the humble boy he had tried to crush for sport. The humiliation he had planned for Liam had boomeranged with devastating force. It had found its true target. Marcus Thorne, the titan of industry, stood alone in the center of a world that was no longer his, speechless, pale, and utterly, totally broken. The initial shock wave of the reveal began to subside, replaced by the frantic, buzzing energy of consequence. Mr. Henderson, the bank manager, was now a whirlwind of activity. His previous sycophancy transformed into a desperate, almost comical efficiency. He was on the phone with the bank's legal department, his voice a high-pitched squeak of panic and deference. Yes, the original charter. Miller, Arthur Miller. No, I am not mistaken. He's right here. The heir, Liam Miller. Thorne, still reeling, seemed to reboot. The shock gave way to a cold, calculating fury. The cornered animal was preparing to bite. "This is absurd," he snarled, regaining a sliver of his commanding tone. "A 50-year-old piece of paper? It means nothing. Statutes of limitation, corporate restructuring. This will be buried in litigation for decades. You'll be long dead before you see a penny, boy." He pointed a trembling finger at Liam. "You have made a very powerful enemy today. I will crush you. I will ruin you. I will dismantle your life piece by piece until you are begging on the street, and I will walk by and laugh." The threat was raw and vicious, but it lacked its earlier power. It sounded less like a promise and more like the desperate roar of a wounded lion. Before Liam could respond, a new voice joined the chorus. A woman in a sharp business suit, one of the customers who had been watching from the edge of the crowd, stepped forward. She had been on her phone, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. "I wouldn't be so sure about that, Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice cool and professional. She was a financial reporter for the city's biggest newspaper, and she had just hit the jackpot. A story this big? A forgotten founder? A stolen legacy? This isn't a legal battle, it's a public relations apocalypse. Your stock is going to open in a free fall tomorrow morning. Thorne's face went ashen. He understood the threat of public opinion far better than he understood law. But the true escalation was just beginning. It started with a single, hesitant figure. An older woman who had been standing near the back pushed her way forward. She clutched a worn leather handbag to her chest. "He's telling the truth," she said, her voice trembling but clear. She looked at Liam, her eyes full of emotion. "Arthur Miller. He saved my family." She introduced herself as Mrs. Gable. "My husband was an inventor. He created a new kind of water filtration system. He went to Jonathan Thorne for funding. Thorne stole the patent, paid him a pittance, and built a whole subsidiary of his company on my husband's work. My husband died of a broken heart." She opened her handbag and pulled out a bundle of old letters tied with a faded ribbon. But before he died, he wrote everything down. He even had a secret meeting with Arthur Miller, who was trying to expose what Thorne was doing. "Mr. Miller gave my husband this." She held up a single, signed affidavit from Arthur Miller, corroborating her husband's story and promising to make it right one day. "I've kept these for 40 years, she said, tears welling in her eyes, waiting, praying. It was as if she had opened a floodgate. One by one, others from the crowd stepped forward. An old man who had been a foreman at a construction site, fired for refusing to cut corners on a project Jonathan Thorne wanted done cheaply. He had a logbook detailing the safety violations. A younger man, whose father's small supply business had been deliberately driven into bankruptcy by Thorne Industries so they could acquire its assets for pennies on the dollar. He had his father's desperate, angry diaries. A retired accountant from the bank itself, who confessed with a shaking voice that he had been forced by Jonathan Thorne to cook the books in the 70s, hiding Arthur Miller's assets and transferring them to Thorne's name. He had made a secret copy of the real ledgers, a contingency for his own conscience, and had hidden them in his attic for decades. They were the silent army of the grateful and the wronged. A collection of ordinary people, bound by a shared history of injustice at the hands of the Thorne family and a shared memory of the kindness of Arthur Miller. They had been scattered, isolated voices of dissent. But now, seeing Liam, seeing the vault open, they had found their general, their evidence, their stories, their pain. It all began to weave together into an undeniable tapestry of truth. Liam stood in the center of it all, listening to their stories. Each one was a fresh wound, a new layer to the monstrous crime that had defined his family's life. The $50,000 for his grandmother's surgery now seemed like such a small, insulting part of the equation. This was about justice, a justice 50 years in the making. The unexpected connection was the deepest cut of all. Tomas, the old janitor, explained it in a quiet moment, away from the frantic energy of the crowd. "Your grandmother, Elena," he began, his voice soft with sympathy. "She wasn't just Arthur's wife. She was Jonathan Thorne's sister." Liam stared at him, his mind refusing to compute the information. "What?" "She disowned him when she found out what he did to Arthur," Tomas explained. "She refused to take a single penny of his stolen money. That was the real reason Jonathan hated Arthur so much. It wasn't just business. Arthur hadn't just taken his sister's heart. He had taken her loyalty. Jonathan's betrayal of Arthur was also his revenge on his own sister for choosing integrity over him." The revelation was staggering. It recontextualized everything. The poverty, the struggle. It had been a choice, a noble, painful choice made by his grandmother to refuse blood money. The debt Marcus Thorne had mocked was for the medical care of his own aunt, an aunt his father had betrayed and he had forgotten. The cruelty was not just casual, it was familial. It was biblical in its scope. Marcus, meanwhile, had recovered from his paralysis and was now in full retaliation mode. He was on his phone, barking orders at his lawyers, his publicists, his fixers. "I want injunctions. I want cease and desist orders. Get our people at the SEC to launch an investigation into market manipulation. I want this boy's life examined under a microscope. Find something, anything, a parking ticket, a late bill, I don't care. Bury him in paperwork." His next call was even more sinister. Liam overheard his sister's name, Valentina. "The principal at Northwood High." Thorne snarled into his phone. "He owes me a favor, a big one. I want the girl expelled today. Find a reason. Plagiarism, drugs, fighting. Plant it if you have to. I want her fatherless, brotherless family to feel the pressure." Liam felt a cold dread wash over him. This was no longer about money or buildings. Thorne was now aiming at the one thing Liam had left to lose, his family. The fight had moved from the boardroom to his very doorstep. But Liam's silent army was already moving. The retired accountant, Mr. Abernathy, had his son, a tech-savvy lawyer, rushing downtown with a USB drive containing the pristine, undoctored copies of the original Thorne Industries ledgers. Mrs. Gable had called her nephew, a respected history professor, who could officially verify the age and authenticity of the documents. Mr. Henderson, the bank manager, having seen which way the wind was blowing, had become Liam's most fervent ally. He was a man redeemed, frantically working to protect the Miller assets from any legal chicanery Thorne might attempt. He had already found evidence of recent illegal fund transfers by Thorne and had flagged them for the authorities. He was the redeemed witness, eager to wash the stain of his prior cowardice away with furious action. The bank lobby, once a temple of quiet commerce, had transformed into a war room. The forces were gathering. The lines were drawn. On one side, Marcus Thorne, with his vast fortune, his corrupt networks, and his bottomless capacity for cruelty. On the other, a humble boy, an old janitor, and an army of ghosts from the past, armed with nothing but the truth. The final confrontation was set for the following afternoon. An emergency meeting of the Sterling Legacy Bank Board, of which Thorne was the acting chairman. Thorne had called it himself, a bold, arrogant move designed to project strength. He intended to frame the entire incident as a fraudulent attack on the bank, orchestrated by a disgruntled heir, and to use the board's power to legally entomb Liam's claim. The boardroom was on the top floor, a sterile, intimidating space with a panoramic view of the city Thorne believed he owned. A long, polished mahogany table reflected the grim faces of the 10 board members. They were the old guard of the city's wealth, powerful, cautious men and women who disliked surprises. Marcus Thorne sat at the head of the table, looking composed and powerful once more. His suit was immaculate, his hair perfectly coiffed. The raw panic of the previous day was gone, replaced by a cold reptilian confidence. His team of lawyers sat behind him, a phalanx of expensive suits and predatory smiles. Liam arrived with only 2 people. Tomas, the old janitor, now dressed in a simple but dignified tweed jacket, and Mr. Abernathy, the retired accountant, who clutched a worn briefcase to his chest as if it contained the crown jewels. Liam himself felt a strange calm. The fear was gone, burned away by the righteous anger and the weight of the stories he now carried. He was no longer just fighting for his grandmother, he was fighting for Mrs. Gable's husband, for the fired foreman, for all the lives the Thornes had broken in their ascent. He wore the same simple clothes as the day before, a quiet statement that he had not changed, even if his circumstances had. The media was a frenzy in the lobby downstairs, held back by security. The story had exploded overnight. "The ghost of Grand Avenue," one headline blared. "Thorne Empire built on lies." Marcus Thorne's PR machine was in overdrive, painting Liam as a disturbed, opportunistic charlatan. "Let's begin," Thorne said, his voice smooth as silk. "We are here to address a malicious and fraudulent attempt to destabilize this institution. Yesterday, a young man, a Mr. Liam Miller, staged an elaborate piece of theater to lay claim to assets he has no right to. He gestured dismissively at Liam. He exploited an old defunct vault and produced what our experts have already determined to be sophisticated forgeries." One of his lawyers slid a thick-bound report in front of each board member. "This report details the forensic analysis of the documents," the lawyer said. The paper is artificially aged. The ink composition is inconsistent with the period. The signatures are clever digital reproductions. It was a lie, a complete, audacious fabrication. But it was printed on expensive paper and bound in leather. It looked official. It looked convincing. Several board members nodded grimly. This was Thorne's final gambit, a wall of plausible deniability. He didn't need to win in a court of law. He just needed to win here, in this room. He needed to create enough doubt to have the board vote to freeze the vault's contents and bury Liam's claim under years of legal challenges. Furthermore, Thorne continued, going for the kill, we have uncovered a disturbing pattern of financial instability in Mr. Miller's life. He is deeply in debt, primarily due to family medical bills. He said the words with a small, cruel smile. It is the classic motive of a desperate man. This entire charade is nothing more than a high-stakes grab for cash. He leaned back, confident. The trap was set. He had presented a clear, logical narrative. Forgeries, a desperate debtor, a threat to the bank's stability. He had the experts, the reports, the power. What did Liam have? An old janitor and a briefcase full of dusty papers. The chairman of the board, a stern-faced woman named Eleanor Vance, turned her cold eyes to Liam. Mr. Miller, do you have a response? Liam stood up. The room was silent. He did not look at the fabricated report. He did not look at the lawyers. He looked directly at each board member one by one, meeting their gaze. My name is Liam Miller, he began, his voice steady and clear. My grandfather was Arthur Miller, and everything Mr. Thorne has just told you is a lie. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The simple, unadorned truth had its own power. You have a report claiming my grandfather's ledger is a forgery, Liam said. I have the man who was forced by Jonathan Thorne to create the forged ledgers you've been operating from for 50 years. He nodded to Mr. Abernathy. The old accountant stood up, his hands trembling slightly, and opened his briefcase. He didn't produce dusty papers. He pulled out a sleek, modern laptop and a small projector. Mr. Thorne's lawyers had 24 hours to create a fake report, Abernathy said, his voice gaining strength. I have had 40 years to preserve the truth. He projected an image onto the wall. It was a scanned page from a ledger showing Jonathan Thorne authorizing an illegal transfer of assets from the Miller holding account to his own private accounts. The signature was a perfect match to the one on the documents the board used every day. Then he projected a second image, the real ledger page, showing the funds being directed to a charitable trust signed by Arthur Miller. I have a digital copy of every single transaction, both the real and the forged, from 1972 to 1978, when I was forced into retirement, Abernathy stated. A USB drive containing all of it is on its way to the district attorney's office as we speak. A wave of shock went through the board members. They stared at the two images on the wall, the clear, undeniable proof of decades-old fraud. Liam continued, pressing his advantage. Mr. Thorne calls me a desperate debtor. He is correct. I am desperate. Desperate to save my grandmother, Elena Miller, the woman whose life of hardship was a direct result of her brother, Jonathan Thorne, stealing her husband's legacy. He looked directly at Marcus Thorne. He speaks of my debt. Let's speak of his. The Thorne Industries patent for the Aqua Pure filter. It generates over $200 million a year. It was stolen from a man named Robert Gable, who was paid $5,000 and then cast aside. From the back of the room, Mrs. Gable's nephew, the history professor, spoke up. The affidavit from Arthur Miller detailing this theft has been authenticated by 3 independent experts this morning. It is genuine. One by one, Liam calmly, systematically dismantled Thorne's narrative. He presented the foreman's logbook, corroborated by a structural engineer who confirmed that dangerous and shoddy practices were a hallmark of Thorne's early projects. He presented the diaries of the bankrupted supplier, cross-referenced with Abernathy's ledgers, showing Thorne Industries deliberately strangling their cash flow. The final blow came from Thomas. He stood and presented a single sealed letter. "This is the most damning evidence of all," Thomas said, his voice heavy with sadness. "It is a letter of confession written by Jonathan Thorne to Arthur Miller 5 years after the betrayal. His conscience, it seems, was not entirely dead. He begged for forgiveness. He admitted to everything." He slid the letter across the table to Eleanor Vance. Arthur never used it. He couldn't bring himself to destroy his friend completely. He kept it as a reminder of a great tragedy, a reminder of what happens when ambition poisons the soul. Eleanor Vance read the letter. Her face, already grim, hardened into a mask of cold fury. She passed it to the next board member. A heavy, damning silence filled the room as the letter made its way around the table, each person reading the pathetic, self-serving confession of the man who had founded their fortunes. The unanimous verdict was a foregone conclusion. When the letter came back to her, Eleanor Vance looked at Marcus Thorne. Her voice was ice. "Marcus, you are a disgrace to your father's name, which, it turns out, was already a disgrace. The board votes unanimously to remove you as chairman and to strip you of all executive authority at this bank, effective immediately. Furthermore, we will be cooperating fully with the authorities in their investigation into the historical and current fraud perpetrated by you and your father. Security will escort you from the building." Thorne sat, stunned. He looked at his lawyers, but they were already packing their briefcases, their faces blank, distancing themselves from a sinking ship. He looked at the board members, but they refused to meet his eye. His empire, built on a foundation of lies, had crumbled to dust in less than an hour. 2 large security guards entered the room. They walked to Thorne's chair. One of them, the very same guard who had looked at Liam with such contempt the day before, said, "Sir, it's time to go." Marcus Thorne stood up. He was a man hollowed out, the arrogance and power stripped away, leaving only a pathetic, trembling shell. He looked at Liam one last time, his eyes burning with a hatred that was now impotent. He didn't say a word. He was escorted from the room, a defeated king leaving his castle for the last time. He walked past the media, who descended on him like sharks, their cameras flashing, their questions like blows. He left the building his father had stolen, his reputation in tatters, his fortune frozen, his future a graveyard of industrial dreams. He was alone, utterly and completely alone. The war was over. Liam had won. In the quiet aftermath of the boardroom battle, a profound sense of peace settled over Liam. The storm had passed. He stood by the panoramic window, looking out over the city that had once seemed so vast and intimidating. It no longer looked like an enemy. It looked like a responsibility. His first act was not one of business or finance. It was an act of love. He made a single phone call, his voice thick with emotion, to the hospital. "Schedule it," he said. "My grandmother's surgery. I want the best surgeon, the best team, whatever it costs." The relief that washed over him was a physical sensation, a heavy weight lifting from his soul after years of carrying it. He had done it. He had kept his promise. The hospital waiting room was a familiar circle of hell for Liam, a place of hushed anxiety and stale coffee. But this time it felt different. He was not there as a beggar pleading with fate, but as a man who had bent fate to his will. His sister, Valentina, sat beside him, her hand clutching his. The threat against her had evaporated the moment Thorne's power crumbled. The principal of her school had called personally to apologize, stammering about a terrible misunderstanding. Valentina, a fiery and protective young woman, looked at her brother with a new kind of awe. When the surgeon finally emerged from the operating theater, his green scrubs a stark contrast to the bland beige of the waiting room, he was smiling. "The procedure was a complete success," the doctor announced. "She's a strong woman. She'll make a full recovery." The words were the sweetest victory of all. Liam felt his knees go weak, and he sank into a chair, the tension of a lifetime finally releasing in a single, shuddering sob. Valentina wrapped her arms around him, and for the first time in years they cried together, not tears of sorrow or fear, but of pure, cathartic relief. The past, with all its pain and struggle, was finally being healed. A few days later, Liam made his first official announcement as the majority owner of the newly restructured Sterling Miller Group. The press conference was held not in a stuffy boardroom, but in the community hall of a struggling neighborhood, the kind of place he had grown up in. He stood at a simple podium, not in an expensive suit, but in a clean, modest shirt and trousers. He looked out at the sea of reporters and the hopeful faces of the community members who had gathered. "The Thorne Corporation was built on a foundation of greed," he began, his voice steady and strong. "Today, we lay a new foundation, one of integrity, community, and shared prosperity." He announced that there would be no mass layoffs. Instead, a significant portion of the company's profits would be immediately redirected into a new employee pension fund and a comprehensive health care plan. Wages would be raised across the board, starting with the lowest-paid workers. His second announcement brought a gasp from the crowd. He was establishing the Elena Miller Foundation for Community Health, seeded with an initial endowment of $100 million. Its first project would be to build a new state-of-the-art cardiac wing for the public hospital, ensuring that no one else would have to face the terror of a sick loved one and an impossible bill. His third act was more personal. He announced a full scholarship program for Northwood High, the very school Thorne had threatened, and made a substantial donation to repair its aging facilities. He was not just healing his own wounds, he was healing the wounds Thorne had tried to inflict on others. It was a clear, powerful statement. Liam Miller had not been corrupted by his newfound power. He was using it as a shield, just as his grandfather had intended. He was demonstrating that wealth did not have to be a weapon. It could be a tool for creation and compassion. After the press conference, as the excitement died down, Tomas approached him. The old man's eyes were shining with pride. He held out one final letter, its envelope even older and more yellowed than the first. "Your grandfather left this for you," Tomas said. His instructions were very specific. You were only to read it after you had reclaimed your legacy and chosen your path. Liam took the letter. He found a quiet corner of the hall and carefully opened it. The script was the same elegant looping hand, but it felt different now, more familiar, like the voice of a beloved mentor. "My dearest Liam," it began, "if you are reading this, then you have done it. You have faced the wolf and reclaimed what is ours. But reclaiming the money was never the true test. The test is what you do now. The test is whether the power will change you. I failed that test once. In my early days, I was seduced by the numbers, by the thrill of acquisition. I became cold, distant. It was your grandmother, Elena, who saved me. She reminded me that a life is measured not by the balance in a ledger, but by the lives you touch. She was my moral compass, my true north. My greatest fortune was never in a vault. It was her. This legacy I have left you is a burden as much as it is a gift. Money is a current. It can power a city, or it can be a flood that drowns everything in its path. You must be the dam. You must be the engineer who directs that current toward the light. Do not make my mistakes. Do not let the pursuit of more blind you to what you already have. Build things, build communities, build hope. The ledgers will fade, the companies will change, but the good you do for others, that is the only thing that endures. That is true legacy. Know that wherever I am proud, not of the wealth you now command, but of the man I know you will choose to be. You are the best of me, the best of your grandmother, and I love you. Your grandfather, Arthur. Tears streamed down Liam's face as he read the final words. It was the benediction he never knew he needed. It was the final missing piece of his own identity. He wasn't just the heir to a fortune, he was the heir to a philosophy. He folded the letter and placed it in his pocket, next to his heart. The healing was complete. The moral victory was absolute. He was ready to begin his work. 10 years later, the city had changed, and Liam Miller had been a quiet, steady force behind much of that change. The Sterling Miller Group was a titan of industry, but it was a different kind of titan. It was known less for its ruthless efficiency and more for its ethical practices, its generous employee profit sharing, and its deep investment in the urban landscape. The name Thorne was a fading memory, a cautionary tale told in business schools about the dangers of hubris. The Thorne Building was now the Miller Center, a gleaming testament to a new era. Liam himself remained an enigma to the city's elite. He was one of the wealthiest men in the world, yet he lived in a modest, comfortable brownstone, not a sprawling mansion. He was often seen taking the subway or walking through the city's many parks, his face thoughtful and calm. The humble boy was still there, visible in his kind eyes and his easy smile. He had gained immense power, but had never lost his core of humility. His greatest achievement was not a skyscraper or a corporate acquisition, but the enduring legacy of the Elena Miller Foundation. It had built hospitals, funded scholarships, and revitalized entire neighborhoods that had been left to decay. The foundation was a living, breathing embodiment of his grandfather's final letter, a powerful current directed towards the light. His grandmother, Elena, had lived for 8 more happy, peaceful years, presiding over the foundation's early work, with a fierce pride in her grandson. One crisp autumn afternoon, Liam was walking through a small market in a part of the city that was just beginning to feel the effects of his foundation's investments. He saw a young boy, no older than 10, standing by a small, wobbly table. The boy was selling homemade candy, his face a mask of fierce, desperate determination that Liam recognized instantly. An elegantly dressed woman walked by, glanced at the boy's humble display, and scoffed, "Get a real job." The boy flinched, but his jaw tightened, and he stood his ground. It was a scene from Liam's own past, a perfect echo across time. Liam walked over to the boy's table. "This looks delicious," he said warmly. "What's it for?" The boy looked up, his eyes wary. "My mom," he said, his voice small. "She needs medicine." Liam's heart ached with a familiar pain. He smiled gently. "I see. In that case, I'll take it all." The boy's eyes widened in disbelief. "All of it?" "All of it," Liam confirmed. He paid the boy far more than what the candy was worth, a sum that made the boy's jaw drop. "But why?" the boy stammered. Liam knelt down so he was at eye level with the child. "Because a long time ago I was standing right where you are," he said softly, "and someone helped me. They gave me a chance when no one else would. It's called paying it forward." He took out a card. "My name is Liam. This is for my foundation. I want you to give it to your mother. We'll take care of her medicine, and we'll take care of your school tuition, all of it. All you have to do is promise me one thing." "Anything," the boy whispered, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Promise me that you'll work hard," Liam said, "and that one day when you're able, you'll find someone who needs help, and you'll pay it forward, too." The boy nodded furiously, clutching the card like it was the most precious thing in the world. As Liam walked away, he thought briefly of Marcus Thorne. The last he had heard, Thorne had served a short prison sentence for financial fraud. Upon his release, broke and universally despised, he had been offered a job by the son of the foreman Jonathan Thorne had once fired. A simple, honest job as a clerk in his successful construction company. It was an act of profound grace, an offer of redemption. Thorne, too proud and too bitter to accept charity from a man he considered his inferior, had spat on the offer and vanished. He was last seen as a ghost in a different way, a lonely, angry man haunting the fringes of the city, forever trapped in the prison of his own arrogance. A man who had everything and ended up with nothing. Liam, on the other hand, had started with nothing and gained everything because he understood what true wealth was. He had learned that it was not something you could lock away in a vault, but something you gave away freely. The seeds of his grandfather's kindness, planted so long ago in a foundation of integrity and love, had finally blossomed. The harvest would be eternal.